Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for tuning in via YouTube to this episode of Thriving and Resilient, where we have conversations on raising MKs. Joining us today is Heidi Thunberg from Reach Global, and Maggie and I met Heidi. Oh man, it's probably going on. It's 2017, maybe 5 years ago now, and we kind of hit it off with our mutual interest and love for MKs and third culture kids and all of that. And so Maggie and I have actually learned an awful lot from Heidi, and we're super excited that she took the time out of her day to share with us for the next half hour, 45 minutes. Heidi, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, nice to be here with you guys. I am the MK caregiver for Reach Global, which is the Evangelical Free Church of America mission. And I've been in this role for about 19 years. And I grew up in Malaysia and Singapore, so I'm an MK myself. And I've always just been interested in working with TCKs. I have a counseling background. I was a therapist for a few years before I started doing this. And I focus on the teens, the kids, our kids in their teens and 20s. So I do a lot of educating, but also support and counseling type of care. So that's me.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to have a conversation on change and transitions. And Heidi actually helped us a lot when we moved down to Costa Rica with quite a bit of really useful and helpful advice with our own kids. Patrick was 3 at the time. So I'm excited to have a little bit of conversation on change. So we can just jump right in. So Heidi, I have some questions here I was hoping we can go over. The first one being, how would you say that transitions affect the family as a unit? We all probably sense that it does affect us, and we can see how, but maybe having some labels and vocabulary and maybe a little explanation of that can help us out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one thing to start with is just that the transition experience has an impact on everybody in the family. So let's talk about just a little bit of what that is, and then I can flesh that out a little bit for the different age groups. So some people are already familiar with Dave Pollock's transition model. I find that to be really helpful when we talk about transitions in a cross-cultural setting, just because it was a transition model kind of designed for that particular context. Some transition models are more general to any kind of a life transition. But he talks about the involvement stage before you move anywhere. When you've been somewhere, you've been settled for a few years, that's a stage where you have some belonging and you have responsibilities, and so you know other people, you're known by other people, you're connected, and you have responsibilities that you carry out. So you have kind of a lifestyle. When you start getting ready to move, that leaving stage, you're preparing and you're starting to think ahead at what needs to be done. You start to loosen some of those ties with the people that you know. I've heard some people say, when I get to the point where I was getting ready to move, and I've heard this from MKs too, people just kind of shut me out because they didn't, they knew I was going to be leaving and they didn't know what to do with me. And that, lovely, my map's going away. That was all my MKs on the map. But at that point, people can sometimes kind of detach from you. You can start to detach from them. You're starting to give up your responsibilities, figure out who's going to be doing that in the future. The next stage is the transition stage, where you're actually in the middle of transition. And the transition stage is really chaotic because you aren't in the old place and you aren't in the new place. You haven't settled in, but you haven't got your life that you had before either. And that's the stage that most people find to be most distressing for everybody in the family, because that's the point where you don't belong, you don't know where you fit, you aren't known by anybody. So there's a lot of social losses and a lot of feeling uncertain and a lot of feeling confused and unsettled. And then your responsibilities, your schedule, your life, nothing is settled. A lot of times transitions for for missionary families, they haven't spent a lot of time, they haven't been able to ahead of time get their, their housing lined up and everything organized. And so they get there and they're still trying to kind of figure that out. What's my role going to be? What's my job going to be? Sometimes missionaries go through language school, so they have 2 years of time that, functionally they're in transition that whole time because they haven't really gotten into their new role of what they're going to be doing in ministry. They're just trying to learn the language and figure that out. If they go to language school, like I know in Costa Rica, you have a language school where people come there a lot and then they go on to the next place. They're in transition that whole time and their kids are, they're there and they're settling in, but they know they're going to be leaving again. Eventually you get to the entering stage where you start to kind of learn things and you're settling in and things are starting to calm down a little bit. And then eventually over a course of a year to 2 years to 3 years, you really settle in and you've established yourself in a new place. During that time frame, you may find that as you're going through the leaving stage, kids are having to do a lot of goodbyes. There's a lot of sadness a lot of times, but there's also, because there's all this celebration, people are saying, having goodbye parties. If you're, an adult, people are doing that with you, but also people are doing that with the kids. One of the things to remember for parents in that time frame is to be sure to facilitate, if you have younger kids, be sure to facilitate them saying goodbye as well. I think we're going to talk later about some of the things that you can do to help, but I'll just talk about that as the leaving stage now, because small children don't have a venue to do a lot of goodbye saying to their friends or to the places around them unless their parents help them facilitate that. And that goes all the way through really to even teens. Encouraging your kids to say goodbye well is really important. We'll talk a little bit more later about how to do that in specific, some practical ways. But as a family, recognize that during that time, that leaving time, you're going to have a lot of ups and downs in your feelings. Maybe your feelings coming out of unexpected times. Maybe getting grumpier than usual, especially as you're starting to try to pack and you have all your mind going in 5 billion different directions. It's not unusual for people to kind of have more accidents, like stumbling around or bumping into things or knocking things over, because when you're in that mode, you're often hurrying a lot more and your mind is in a lot of different places, and you're more likely to have mishaps occur, and that can be frustrating, and that can be another thing that where tempers flare or where emotions come to the surface when you're trying to get everything finished and suddenly the box that you just packed tips over and everything falls out, or your kid bumps the box and everything falls out. So just recognizing that tension and emotions are running high in that time. I think as a family, when you can recognize that that's likely to occur, you can be more on guard against those becoming destructive in the family. That emotional turmoil continues into that transition time where everything feels so unsettled and everything feels so chaotic. One of the things that David Pollock, who wrote the book on Third Culture Kids, he used to speak, and this is his model, and he used to say at this point, this is where people who are not self-centered by personality, they're not naturally self-centered people, can become really self-centered. Because at that point, everybody in the family is just trying to think, how do I survive this? I can't even worry about how everybody else survives. I've just got to survive this myself, because it can feel so overwhelming going through that transition time. So again, being conscious of that and being able to take a step back and learn some things that help you relax, and that help your family to have some connected time. Think back of ways that you connected when you were settled in settled times, and pulling in some of those transitions. Maybe your family used to go for walks, and you're in a new place and you don't know where you can go for a walk, but maybe ask around. Could you even go to a mall and walk around? Is there a place in this new area where your family could get out and take a walk together and have some of the time that, the things that used to help you feel calmer and connected to one another, because that doesn't naturally happen as much when you're in some of the chaos of transition. As you start entering the new place, one of the things to be aware of in a family setting is that people may settle in at different rates. And so your emotions may not match one another very well. if somebody is feeling like they're getting pretty settled and then somebody else is not settling as well, one family member is learning the language well, one person isn't. A kid may have a really good day. One kid has a really great class in school and, they're really welcoming. Another kid has a really difficult class situation and they're not making friends very well. And those kids are having a very, very different experience from each other. It's not something that you can just totally solve. But again, being aware of it helps you as a parent to pay attention to, okay, so who needs more focused attention at this point? Or not assuming that because I'm doing badly, my kids are necessarily having the same experience, or because I'm doing well, my spouse or my kids are having the same experience. And just kind of that heads up, I think sometimes awareness is the way that you solve the problem, is because you just don't assume as much.
Absolutely. Could you one more time kind of just sum up maybe with the one word label of those stages of transition that you just walked us through?
The initial stage is the involvement stage or the engagement stage. That's where you're actually settled in a place. The next stage is the leaving stage, where you're getting ready to leave. And you're doing all your packing, you're saying your goodbyes, you're kind of thinking about the future, like, what do I need to get done before I leave? All those types of things. Letting go of some of your involvements and so on. Kids in that time sometimes will let go of their involvements too quickly, by the way. They may, the senioritis effect, but not necessarily, they're not necessarily seniors. The third stage is the transition stage proper. Okay. And the fourth stage is the entering stage, where you're getting settled in, and then that leads eventually to the re-involvement or re-engagement stage, where you're back to square one again. It's kind of it's a circle.
Yeah, well, I think that's helpful to be able to kind of maybe identify, excuse me, where someone is, for someone to kind of look at where am I in this transition stage? And, then this kind of makes sense. So what would be some healthy practices for families in transition? I'm familiar with the raft. Maybe you could explain the raft and help us understand why that's important.
Sure. The raft concept, again, that's a Dave Pollock model, and Ruth Van Reken, I think, is part of that just because of the book. But that's the process, the acronym he developed to help people think about how to leave well. Because when you leave well, it helps you to settle in well. If you don't have good closure in the first place, you end up taking a lot of unfinished business with you to the next place. So the first thing is the R, and that stands for reconciliation. I think I have do you want to try to put the document up while we're talking about this?
Throw that up here.
Okay.
All right. So should be good.
Okay. So reconciliation is, there I am too.
All right. We'll just leave it at that then.
Get to see myself. Okay. Reconciliation is fixing things that have gone wrong between you and other people. Research has shown that if you leave a problem behind, you don't really leave it behind emotionally. You actually take it along with you. In the emotional business is not done. And it's easy to think sometimes if you have a conflict with somebody and you're leaving, I'll just go and I won't have to see that person again. But the emotional stuff goes along, and it makes it harder for you when you have new relationships, and it can mess around with your new relationships. One of the things that is true for many TCKs is that they are bad at reconciliation. TCKs have grown up with moving being the norm, and so a lot of times we are not good at conflict management or conflict resolution. We just kind of wait out our problems. If you ignore your problem long enough, it will go away. Literally, the person will move. Either you go away or they go away, but the problem goes away. The challenge with that is that it leaves MKs or TCKs in general with a lot of unfinished emotional business, and that really starts to drag them down in relationships in the future. So if you're a parent, really teaching your kids good conflict resolution skills. That's something that it's a skill. It's not something that most people do naturally. So helping them to make things right with their friends. And that starts when they're really young. And it's easier to manage conflicts between children when they're young, because it's usually conflicts over, he took my toy, or she pushed me, or she said that I was stupid, or, something that's a fairly small thing, to be able, where they can say, say you're sorry, and, say, like, forgive them. And it's easier to reconcile younger children. So if you give them that foundation, then helping them as they get older and there's maybe more serious conflicts, or more serious offenses, helping them to do whatever they can do. But as you're getting ready to leave, think through, and this is this handout on the screen is a handout that I use at our reentry program. Unfortunately, we're using it after the kids have already left, so they have to kind of think through in the past. But is there anybody who's hurt or offended you who you still need to forgive? Sometimes when you need to forgive someone, you need to go to them and make things right and say, I forgive you. Sometimes they don't even know that you're harboring some bad feelings about them. And it may not be that you actually need to go to them. You may just need to forgive them in your heart. That may be something that you can do unilaterally without involving them. But determine which that is. If it's something where the two of you have things between you and they know that you are upset with them, you may need to go to them specifically and say, I forgive you and I want to make things right between us. On the flip side, is there anybody who you've offended to whom you need to apologize before you go? Sometimes it isn't something really clear. Sometimes it's a little bit of both. And there are times when people leave and they haven't done this. I had a girl come to me at a reentry program. She was a high school grad and was going to college. And she came to me after we had talked about this, and she said, this really convicted me. I have a friend who was my best friend all through college, or all through high school. And at the end, we got in a fight and we didn't talk to each other for the last semester of high school. And she goes, I feel so bad, and I just feel like I have so many regrets about not making things right with her and not being able to have that last time together. We were together for that whole semester, and we missed that semester together because we were mad at each other. But now I'm far away. What can I do? And so we brainstormed a little bit, and she decided that she would write her an email message. She had to get the email because she didn't have it, but she got her friend's email and she wrote her a message. And she actually wrote me a few months later, and she said, I had a really good talk with my friend. I wrote her the message, and she wrote me right back, and she said, I am so sorry too. I feel so bad about that too. And we've been communicating ever since, and we just ended up having a long phone call and talking and really talking things through. And she was so grateful that she had fixed that problem before she had to start stepping into the new relationships. So it's not too late. It's just easier when you can do that before you go. The A is affirmation. And that is thinking through who has been important to you, and who you need to say thank you to, who you need to tell how important they've been. It's the keeping short accounts with people. All of this is good practice in general, but especially when you're leaving. I have a good friend, or I had a good friend from college who, when I was in grad school, we had lived near each other through the time that I was in grad school. And at the end of grad school, I was going to be moving away, and I had found some stuff as I was sorting my old pictures and things. I had found some notes that he'd written when I was going through a really hard time. And so I had a phone conversation with him before I left. And I, kind of told him, I said, I remember, I found this thing that you wrote me, and I remember what a good friend you were to me when I was going through such a hard time and doing all my reentry stuff and processing things. And just thanked him for being such a good friend and being so helpful to me. And this isn't not something that happens all the time, but I had moved away, and within 2 weeks of me moving, I got a phone call that he had been killed in a car accident. And it was devastating. It was the first time I'd lost somebody who was that close to me, who was my age. But as as you always do when you have a major loss, you start thinking, if I could just see them again, what would I could say, what would I say? And I thought, I don't have anything that I need to tell him. I told him everything I needed to tell him. Like if he could come back and I could see him one last time, there isn't anything else I need to say about how much I appreciated his friendship, because I've said it. And that was so helpful to me as I processed saying saying a permanent goodbye to him. The reality is, nowadays we don't say permanent goodbyes as much because technology allows us to keep in touch a lot more. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to affirm our friendships. We never know when the goodbye is going to be long term. Sometimes you think you're going to keep in touch and you don't. Sometimes unexpected things happen, like with me and my friend. But the reality is that saying goodbye well and affirming those friendships, not only did that feel good to the people who are affirmed and feel good to you to be able to tell them those things, it also allows you then to move forward into new friendships and engage with them, rather than having that like old, like, I wish I had said that to that person. And those questions I have are questions just for them to kind of think through, who do you need to affirm? The F in RAFT, if you can move down on the handout.
Oh, was that other question missed there? Who has been a role model for you is kind of hiding if you didn't see it on the screen there.
Yeah.
So, all right, F in RAFT.
The F is for farewells, and that's saying goodbyes. Saying goodbyes to people is an obvious one. Of course, you say goodbye to people. One of the things that I remind parents is that who their children need to say goodbye to may not be who the parents think they need to say goodbye to. So ask your children, who do you want to be sure to say goodbye to, and who might miss you when you're gone? If they're young, asking them those kinds of questions. Who might miss you, or who might you miss when you're gone that you want to say goodbye to before you leave? One of the people that I didn't say goodbye to, one of the people I did say goodbye to when I was in third grade and we were in the States, my closest friend, I suppose not surprisingly, my closest friend was the recess lady, the playground attendant lady on for recess. And every day at recess, I would stand and talk with her. And so it was really important for me when I was moving away, when I was moving back to Malaysia, to go and say goodbye to Mrs. Lemon. And as it happened, I never saw Mrs. Lemon again. But that was a big deal to me when I was 8 years old. My parents didn't even know that Mrs. Lemon was part of my life. So they never would have thought to say, now, who, do you need to say goodbye to Mrs. Lemon?
Right, yeah.
But fortunately, as an 8-year-old, I was able to recognize that I wanted to say goodbye to Mrs. Lemon. When I was a little bit older, when we were moved to Malaysia, there was a little shop that was near our house, and my sister and I used to walk down to that shop probably several times a week when we were younger, probably most days actually. And as I got older, we maybe walked, go down there every week or so. But the shopkeeper was always really kind to us, and he watched us grow up. And then one day we just disappeared and we never came back because we moved. We didn't think to go say goodbye to Mr. Ng. And I always wondered, what happened to him? And did he wonder where those little girls were that had grown up there and watched, who he'd watched grow up for all those years? Did he wonder where we went? And, some people are not sentimental. He maybe didn't wonder, but I'm the kind of person who does sort of wonder about those things. And I always thought, I wish I had just gone and said, we're going to be moving, goodbye. And thank you for, being, here for us all these years and for the shop that you run, because we had so much joy going down there and getting chocolates. And every once in a while he'd give us a little free candy. And so those, saying goodbye to the people that you don't necessarily expect. Again, my parents would never have thought to say, is there anybody around the neighborhood who you feel like you need to say goodbye to? Like, that just didn't occur to them. Saying goodbye to places. The other thing that I didn't do well when I left that house is I didn't say goodbye to my house. I didn't have time. I ran down to the car and I needed to kind of hustle out because we were late to go to the airport. And I had meant to go back and say goodbye to my bedroom that had been my bedroom for 10 years. And I didn't do it. And for years, if I would talk about that I never got to say goodbye to my bedroom, I would tear up. I was probably grad school age where I suddenly thought, I could go back and do that in my mind. And I did. And I mentally went back and said goodbye. And it was the strangest feeling. I kind of walked through. I'm able to visualize. Not everybody is, but if you're able to visualize, this is a way to go back and do it if you haven't done it properly the first time. But I visualized going into my house and walking upstairs and looking around my bedroom and saying goodbye. And I had this feeling like, I don't want to leave. And then my conscious mind kicked in and it was like, Well, you can leave because you can always come back. You're not really there. It's only in your head. But interestingly, once I did that one time, I never needed to do it again. And I think, that tells us a lot about how closure works. So if you're a kid, say goodbye to the places that are important to you, whether it's your room, your secret hideout, your favorite coffee shop, the place that your family went on vacation every time, especially if it's somewhere where you can go one last time as a family. That's a great thing to do, is to go to those favorite vacation spots one last time before you go. The favorite place that you used to, hang out with your friends. If you're a parent, helping your kids think through, what are those places that you want to see one last time? Walking through the house together before you leave, and having, kind of a, I remember in this room when we did this, and being able to reflect together as a family as you're saying goodbye to your house, or in a place, as you're in your favorite vacation spot. I remember my favorite memory from this place is, and having everyone in the family be able to share their memories of that place and say those goodbyes. It's so much more effective to do it if you can do it before you leave. It's not all lost if you haven't, but if you have, if you can, it's better to do it that way. Other things that you need to say goodbye to, sometimes especially children need to say goodbye to their possessions if you can't take their things with them. Having sort of a ritual where they, say goodbye and maybe pass that along as if it's something, a special possession, if they can find somebody who they can give it to. That can be kind of a special presentation, and it's a goodbye to the person, and it's also a goodbye to the possession. You're giving your possession a new home. Yeah. Are there other things you've worked with this? This would be normally the place where I would ask the audience, like, what other things do you need to say goodbye to?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, those, when I was growing up, would say I had a tree I would always climb and spend a lot of time in, just sitting. And it was actually kind of like a choke cherry tree, so you could climb up high in the branches and just sit and and look across the we were on a couple acres at the time and could look across like the land and the mountains while you just ate cherries, and it was awesome.
Yeah.
That's for certain, was for certain one. Maybe a park. If you visited a park a lot, that became kind of the central hangout spot. I know we have a place here where a lot of people congregate in a park that's kind of centralized near the language school. Yeah, some of those things are also things you may not think of. Just to walk through one more time, walk down the road here one more time, and
some places where kids take public transportation a lot, and they have a train that they take downtown with their friends, or they have a bus that they take to school, not a school bus, but like a public bus. And, sometimes making that route one last time, but in a conscious way, like I'm doing this as a last, like this is my last time doing this, and consciously saying goodbye. Saying goodbyes can be really painful, and so a lot of people try to avoid them. And at the same time, if you don't say them, again, you leave with a lot of unfinished business. You don't get to avoid the pain by not saying goodbye. It goes with you. It just goes underground, and then you get to deal with it later. There's some good kids books about saying goodbye. I don't have a picture of them, and I didn't grab the book to hold it up on the screen anyway, but Frank Ash, A-S-C-H is how you spell his last name. He's written a book called Goodbye House, and it's for really little kids, but it's the family going back through the house and talking through their memories. And it's a good prompt if you have young children to, be able to then go and do that with them, because they've seen that in the book. There's another book that's similar called Lost and Found House, and I'm trying to remember who wrote that. I can't remember. I can put together a list that can we put a list of things? Can I put it in the comments on this video? Somehow?
Yeah, we can work on putting something that up after we're done here. Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. Because there's a lot of books for younger children that talk about saying goodbyes to places and people, and those would maybe be helpful if you have younger children and you're trying to work through that with them.
So it'll be the R, the A, the F. So the R, if anybody's just kind of joined us, we're going through the RAFT model. We looked at reconciliation, affirmation, and the RAFT model is just a how to say goodbye. as we think of transitions and change to have to find closure, Heidi's been walking us through the acronym reconciliation, affirmation, and we just finished with farewells, and that would leave us with think destination then, huh?
Think destination or think ahead. This is the one where you can tell that they were really trying to be creative in figuring out how to make this be a raft. Because really the more proper term for this would be expectations. Pay attention to your expectations. And the cheat sheet there says try to make your expectations realistic and also make them positive. But basically what this is trying to become consciously aware of your expectations, because the reality is we all have expectations about how things are going to work and how things are going to be and how things are going to look. And if we aren't aware of our expectations, that's when we really are susceptible to getting depressed when those expectations that we didn't realize we had are not met. Sometimes you'll ask somebody, what do you expect it to be like when you move? And they say, oh, I don't really know. I don't know enough about it to really know what to expect. The reality is they do expect something, and they're going to bump into a reality that doesn't match that. And that really can throw you if you aren't aware of that. Whereas if you are aware that you expect that, and then it doesn't match that, you at least know why you're disappointed and why you're feeling that feeling of letdown or upset or being upset. So trying to become conscious of your expectations is the first step. And then checking your expectations to see, am I thinking something like it's going to be the most amazing, wonderful thing, and I'm sure that there's not going to be any problems. Everything is going to be just amazing and wonderful. Probably most people aren't that unrealistically positive, but if you hear yourself being excessively optimistic, where you don't recognize that there's going to be any challenges, it's a good clue that you might be in for a letdown. The flip side is if your expectations are too negative, so then what you need to work on is, where do I need to make my expectations a little bit more realistic? Recognizing that it can be really good, and there are also going to be things that are certain to be hard. There are also going to be times when I really don't enjoy being in the new place. There are also going to be times when I really miss this thing that I didn't even think I'd miss. But I can get through it. If on the other hand you're thinking this is going to be terrible, this is going to be awful, that's setting you up for failure. Because when sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Are you hearing that too?
Let me mute my microphone and maybe it'll cut it out for us.
Okay. Well, that cut it out, I guess. When you have negative expectations, you tend to look for what you were expecting. If you're generally looking for positive things, you're generally looking for things to be good. It feels like, or you end up finding the things that you're looking for. You're still going to have some hard things, but you at least find the good things too. If you're looking for the negative, you're going to find it. If you're looking for people to be mean and cruel and thoughtless and dirty and unpleasant, and you'll find that too. So that's the raft model.
That's the raft. No, that's excellent. Thank you very much. That's something that with youth group, when we do our exit workshops that we'll have the next one in May, this is kind of what most of it is centered around in terms of thinking through what are the goodbyes that we can say while we're still in Costa Rica for the students that are part of our ministry here in Costa Rica. What are goodbyes that we can still say in Costa Rica before we move on to Guatemala or Mexico or the United States or whatever comes next? Varies for so many different families.
Yeah.
Well, I mean that's a lot of change to think about, and with I'm just thinking of those first stages of change and transition that you mentioned first, and then thinking about saying goodbyes, and in all that turmoil. Could you, Heidi, maybe give some tips for maybe speak to the importance of stability, and give some tips for creating an environment of stability in the family system?
Sure. I actually wrote down some notes and then I didn't bring them with me. I don't have them in front of me. But one thing is to kind of keep some of your family traditions I mentioned before. Thinking through when you're going through kind of the transition stage and it's harder to connect and you may not be necessarily on the same page. Thinking through, like, what did we do before to keep connected? What traditions did we have, or what things helped us to feel bonded as a family, and bringing those with you. Having family traditions that wherever you move, you take them from place to place to place. In the resource section, I'll put a blog post that somebody, Jerry Jones, who is lived in China, I think, but anyway, he's done a really good job of coming up with some really creative things that you can do to pull your families from place to place, and keep your traditions going. But if you have certain Christmas traditions, if you have certain items that you put in your house that you can carry along, those things will really help to keep your family, feeling like home. Some parents have talked about having certain things that their children really value, or even like a rug that when they pack it, even though it's not something they would normally pack in carry-on luggage, they'll pack that in their luggage that they, or not carry-on, but that they carry with them rather than their luggage that is shipped overseas. And the first thing that gets unpacked when their children move into the new room is the new rug, or maybe this particular poster for the wall or whatever, so that when their kids go into their new room, that feels like home right away. Maybe it's a blanket that they always have on their bed, or a special pillow or something. But those tangible things that help you to say, this feels like home. When I hang this picture on the wall, this is our house. This is where our family lives.
Why would you say that's important? What's the importance of feeling a connectedness to home for young kids and teenagers and even adults? What have you found?
Well, emotionally, younger children tend to feel at home where their parents are. Home is where mom and dad are, and that follows them. And at the same time, children are sensitive to disruptions in their environment as well. And so having something consistent in the environment is very comforting and reassuring to younger children. Older children and teenagers are maybe a little bit less sensitive to disruption in environment because they make disruption around them a lot anyway. But at the same time, they're going through a lot of changes. And so having something stay stable, there's an emotional connection, or there's an emotional letting down when something in your life hasn't changed. When you go through transitions, so many things change. If you think about moving from one country to another, you have changes from not just like how it looks outside, but even everything from how it sounds, to the smells, to how the air feels, to all the people, the places that you suddenly don't know, and having something where you can go home and you can go, at least here it looks different, but there's some of the same things. There's something that's consistent, and this is where our family fits, and this is where our family belongs. That can just be really reassuring and really settling. Somebody who uses the terms like grounding, there's a little bit of a, I don't know, psychologically sort of term, but that feeling of being grounded, being settled is helpful. So you can do that with things. You can do that with behavioral traditions, like we go for a bike ride every evening, or walk every evening if that's more practical, or maybe it's holiday traditions. Our family had the same Christmas tree, but we also had the same practices my whole growing up, and we continued those wherever we went. Our tree went along, and we always celebrated with the same meal on Christmas Eve. For us, it was hamburger stroganoff, my sister and I chose. We didn't have ham and turkey, so we could choose what we wanted, and it was always hamburger. And to this day, in our family, our Christmas Eve dinner is always hamburger stroganoff. With we go to my parents' house. My sister's got her whole family. She has a bunch of kids, and that's their Christmas tradition now too. But that helps to feel that connection to, where you've moved, and your past isn't segmented. There's some things that have stayed the same.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I guess this is a little different topic, but it's also kind of related. A lot of times when you've moved a lot, your your history seems like a series of segments. If you ask a TCK to tell you their life story, they'll almost always go from, I was born here, and then we moved here, and when I was 5 we moved here, and then when I was 7 we moved here,
Yep.
and then when I was 12 we moved here, and then I was
Yep.
7 we moved and they'll go through, like, you tell them, like, I found something that my sister wrote as a child. She was supposed to write an autobiography as a 10-year-old in 5th grade, and her autobiography was like 2 pages long, 10-year-old writing, and it was, I was born here, and then we moved here, and then we moved, and then I learned to, I learned to walk or something. I can't remember what she had. I learned to do something when she was like a toddler. And then we moved here, and I went to this school, and then we moved, and then I went to this school after that, and then we moved here, and I learned how to ride a bike, and then and it was like, and then we moved here, and I had a hamster, and then we moved to here, and then I went to this school, and the entire autobiography was where I moved and what school I went to, except for, like, I learned how to walk and ride a bike and have a hamster. Like, those were, and that is very, very typical. That's very classic for TCKs. So what happens is they see their lives as a series of discontinuous pieces that aren't related to each other. And so having those family traditions, having those tangible objects that go along with them, helps them to feel some continuity in those segmented pieces.
Tie those pieces together. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Absolutely. No, that's really good. That's fantastic. Maybe one last question, kind of relating to maybe more specific to the environment that we find ourselves in here in Costa Rica, and that has to do with we have a lot of people come in and out of the community here because of the Language Institute, the Spanish Language Institute. And so sometimes every trimester, so every 4 months or so, we'll have people come in and leave and come in and leave and come in and leave. But then there are those of us who are sticking around and aren't leaving. Could you speak a little bit to how someone else's transition, someone else when they move away, how that affects those who stay behind or those who are maybe more stable?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that's challenging about being in the whole expat community is that it is a constantly shifting community, and it's very, very mobile. And so even if you're the person who stays behind, you still say a lot of goodbyes. So some of the things in Raft actually sort of fit for you too. Making sure that when somebody who you care about is leaving, that you do the Raft, that you do the reconciliation, and you do the affirmation, and you say your goodbyes, that you don't have to think it, well, I guess you do sort of think about what things are going to be like without them next year. But it's tempting sometimes when you know somebody is going to be leaving to start to quickly shift and go, okay, so now who am I going to be friends with next year? And not actually finish your closure with the person who's still there. Are there things you need to settle with them? Are there conflicts you need to resolve? Are there things that you need to tell them that you really appreciate or thank them for, that they've contributed to your life? What goodbyes do you need to say, and how do you need to say them? Depending on how close the person is, it may be as simple as just saying goodbye in school. But if it's somebody who's closer, maybe it's getting together for coffee, or going out and spending the evening together and doing something that was special to you personally, like your friendship. Maybe it's having a goodbye party. Maybe you host a goodbye party for that person because you and a bunch of people are friends with them. But looking at how you can contribute to that. The other thing is recognizing that both sides need emotional support when that's going on, and it's depending on which side you're on. It's tempting to kind of be concerned about your own feelings. I had one of my best friends moved a few years ago, and I remember when she told me she was moving, I was thinking, how am I gonna say goodbye to her? Like, this is my closest friend, the one person who I really feel like I can talk to, who lives near me, and now she's going to live halfway across the country from me, which functionally is the equivalent of moving several countries away if you live in a smaller part of the world. And I was so caught up in my own feelings of grief over her leaving that it was really hard for me at first to be supportive of her. And I had to kind of pull myself together and say, she's going through a lot of stuff too. How can I not set aside my feelings, but how can I process my feelings at the same time as I am helping her process her feelings? Like, how can we do that together rather than me feeling like I have to tell her how sad I am and, you know, try to get her to comfort me, where she's feeling the same thing that she wants that from me? How can we do that? How can we be giving to one another rather than just asking from one another, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
And it takes both people kind of purposefully saying, I have these feelings and I want to process them with you and I want you to process in return. Let's purpose to be reciprocal in supporting one another. The older you are, the easier that is to do. It's harder for children to do that, obviously. But if you aren't purposeful about it, what happens is one person ends up doing the giving and the other person ends up doing the receiving, and the giving person doesn't get their emotions processed at all. And that's not the ideal. There may be times where you need to set aside, like you need to set your emotions aside because you have to, you want to help practically, but looking for the ways to process. And, the reconciliation and the affirmation, those are part of processing your feelings. Saying, I'm going to miss you so much. This is the person who you've been to me. This is the friend that you've been. This is how your friendship has impacted my life. That's part of processing those feelings. And having the other person, hear that and reciprocate and say, yes, the friendship is so precious to me too because of blah, 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 blah. Those things are part of grieving together, and you can cry together and you can laugh together and you reflect back on your friendship. And in those goodbye times, you do a lot of that reciprocal giving and taking.
My friend and I, we would have this, we'd use the phrase, "Oh, the good old days," when we think about how much fun we used to have together, especially this is a college friend I'm thinking of, and we spent the summer at school working on campus, and it was pretty carefree, and we got to know each other really well, and kind of the mantra that came out of that for us guys, we don't necessarily like to talk about our feelings all the time. Some do, but our way of reminiscing and kind of affirming each other was, yep, oh, those good old days,
Yeah.
And our wives would always like elbow us, like, hey, what about now? Like, aren't these better now that we're in your lives and stuff?
But that was affirming without the feelings. That was affirming the times. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well,
can I add one more thing?
Sure, absolutely.
For parents, one of the things that can be hard is when your children, whether it's your children are moving or your children are staying behind and their friends are moving, those losses for children are huge. And it's easy sometimes for parents to not realize how big those things are and to try to cajole their children out of feeling bad, because you hate to see your children cry and feel sad. And parents sometimes end up, not intentionally, but dismissing their children's grief, and they're dismissing their children's feelings instead of helping them to feel it and process it. And so, things like, again, whether your children are leaving or your children's friend is leaving, how am I ever going to find another friend? I'll never find another friend who's that good. And, the parents are like, oh, honey, but remember last time, when you thought you weren't going to find a friend and then you guys found each other and it was so good and you did find each other. And so, I'm sure you'll find another good friend next time, next year, or next place or whatever. That's encouragement, and there's a place for encouragement. But when somebody is grieving, that's not the time to encourage them. That's the time to comfort them. And comfort doesn't try to say, I'm sure it will work out fine, it will be just great. Comfort says, I know it's really hard and I'm here. And, just letting them feel the feelings and sometimes for parents to say, you're really going to miss them, just to reflect back to their children. what they're feeling, and help them to be able to put that into words, or to hear in words that's said back to them. So, you know, she's going away. Oh, she's going away. Yeah, and we're not going to be able to play anymore. Oh, that must be really sad, or that must be really hard. You look like you're really sad about that. And being able to help them to express those things and to keep talking then. Because if you say, oh, I'm sorry, but you know, you'll find another friend, that shuts down the conversation right there. The child can't keep expressing and processing. And even if they need to say something a few times, and you just keep reflecting it back to them, or don't say anything, just kind of a neutral, and with your using your face to express, you know, empathy and concern for them, that helps them to be able to process that out. Sometimes they may need to, you know, sometimes you can encourage children that aren't as verbal because they're too young to be able to express their feelings. Sometimes you can express them to draw, you know, ask them to draw a picture, or to, you know, to do something creative with playing, and, you know, getting their dolls, and you can, you know, play dolls where you know, with a girl, probably boys are going to play dolls, but where, you know, one is them and one is their friend, and let them play that out, because children process things through play. If they can draw a picture or color a picture, or maybe they want to act out something, and, you know, what would you like it to be like, or whatever. But letting them do what they need to do, rather than trying to move them along to feeling better right away. Sitting with them in that. Teenagers, as they are older, they'll process more. Usually at the most inconvenient times. Teenagers always want to talk when it's really, really inconvenient.
Like 11 o'clock at night or something like that.
Exactly.
Like you're ready to go to bed, and now you want to talk.
When you're exhausted, or, you know, you've just been together the entire day, and like the last 5 minutes before you get to the house and like to drop them off, or to, you know, to go home, and suddenly they start talking, and you're like, oh man, now we have to sit in the driveway for like 4 hours. But that's important. Teenagers, it's almost like they have this subconscious, like, do you care about me enough to listen if it's inconvenient? But doing that listening. There's a game for communication. Again, this is whether you're leaving or staying. Well, it's not, the game is intended for if you're leaving, but you could use some of the questions too. It's a transition game, and I think you've got the link that you're going to put in the description for this.
Yep, it's in the description right now. It's linked. It's called under the heading transition game.
Mm-hmm. There's other things that are like that, but this is one that's free, and it's available online, and it's questions that are prompts that you can use as you sit around the dinner table with your kids, and you each, you know, however you want to do it, you know, can hand out the cards, or you can draw a card, or they can, you know, look through the cards and choose when they want to answer. But it's a way for you as a family, or maybe just you with, you know, one-on-one, parent to child, for you to be able to open these discussions and help them to talk through what they're feeling, or process what they're feeling. Because if they don't do that, then they take it with them. And yeah. So offering comfort says, I'm here. I know it's really hard. And not trying to just move through it.
Yeah, I've seen a big difference even in interacting with my own children. I have a son who's 3 and a son who's 6 now, and a daughter who's 3, and the difference between trying to just say, oh man, that sounds like that's really hard. It sounds like that's not very fun, is it? And then he kind of gets to express what that does feel like. And then, you know, we found a good balance between, okay, we're not going to dwell on this, you know, forever, but we are going to walk through a period of you talking about it, and then thinking about, you know, oh, okay, now what are some expectations that we can have for the future that are realistic and positive? What does that mean that this person is leaving? But.
And that may be different. How long you need to dwell on it may be different depending on your child. I have a little girl who she's just one of those very sensitive children, and her great grandma died when she was 2, and when she was 6, she would still say every once in a while, I miss great grandma Joe. Like, how do you remember great grandma Jo? Whereas her siblings who were older at the time, like they were sad at the very beginning that grandma died, but then they were okay. Like they didn't need to do that as long. So just recognizing some children may need to process longer because their personality is more sentimental.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been great, Heidi. Thank you so much for taking the day. We could I could sit and keep going over this stuff, but we've kind of reached the time
Our
limit.
ending point.
Yeah, we've reached our ending point. So, but Heidi, thank you for joining us.
Sure.
If for all the families that are out there, if you are listening and you find yourself right in that middle of that culture shock, that 5 to 12 months period of being here and everything's chaos, that's normal, and this too will pass, and it does get better. It does get better on the other side. So keep on persevering, and remember why you're here. I just would like to pray for everyone real briefly, if I may. And Heavenly Father, we thank you for our children, and we thank you for placing them in our care. And Lord, we just we lift them up to you, especially those who are going through transitions. God, you who are the God of all comfort. Teach us how to comfort our kids well, and how to parent well in all these transitions. In the name of Jesus, we ask these things. Amen. Heidi, thank you once again. It has been an honor and a privilege, and we look forward to having you come on another time if time permits. For all our viewers, thank you for tuning in. We're gonna have our next webinar conversation series in May. I believe the date is the 5th of May. It's a Friday. Always a Friday, 1:00 Costa Rica time is what we shoot for. But we'll get some details out about that through the usual channels, and we'll try and get some of that, the list of books that Heidi referenced, as well as another resource she was mentioning in the description of the video here. So have a wonderful afternoon.